Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm here with Dr. Angel Smith, Director of Virgin Islands Studies at H. Lavity Style Community College. Welcome, my brother. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming, and I really appreciate it because this is an important month for us, African Descendants History Month, and I'm saying African Descendants because it's just amazing in this day and time that we are still confused about our identity. You know, it's just the most amazing thing to me. I can't believe it, but somehow we are regressing. But I think we have some values and traditions that we can bring forward. You know, in the African tradition of Sankofa, where you go back into the past to recapture what you had that's valuable and bring it forward to the future, so that you could, you can stabilize yourself and know where you're going. So, in the spirit of Sankofa, I think it's important that we capture and rekindle those values and those traditions, and I feel that one of the reasons why we have not brought those values and traditions forward is because we did not understand the value of them, the value that they played in our communities and in our role in our lives, in our development.
Yeah, well, I think it's important for us to understand that values in essence the center of our life and our existence, how we interact with each other within community. When we look back at our life, we look back at the Virgin Islands, we look back at the Caribbean in the context of values, you would recognize that a lot of our values were taught through the medium of Christianity, through the church. And it seems like with time, as people then reject those teachings, or as you move away from that traditional concept of the church, you tend to throw out everything. And then that leaves us with a bit of a void within our lives, because we figured that but it had nothing to do with, in essence, just Christianity. It had to do with who we are as a people. And if we just throw that out, we throw out those values, then we have nothing.
Yeah, and what was interesting over the last several months, looking into this subject and trying to formulate this series and for African Descendants History, I realized that a lot of our culture and our values were retained from our African past. Exactly. You know, the sharing, the caring, the things that, the ingenuity, the creativity, the moral values, the traditions, they were slightly different. But when you look back in our African ancestry and our African heritage, we see those same traditions and values practiced. Yeah. So it was amazing to me, because I always think of how a lot of our values and our culture was erased during the plantation era, and it was amazing to me to find out how much of those values and that culture we actually retain.
Well, yeah, we would say that there was a bit of a transition that was taking place, because if you look at the plantation era, for example, and the period of slavery, in order to enslave a people, some serious things must have happened, because then your will had to be broken, as it were, and you now had to learn to accept what somebody else imposes on you, and that was one of the difficulties of enslavement. But in the process, over a period of time, then there was what was referred to as the creolization, where you weren't having large imports of slaves from Africa, persons who were being enslaved and brought into the Caribbean. But after the slave trade ended, you find that there was this creolization. So now generations after generations are being born in slavery, but the values and the teachings remain, because these were brought over, so they were a part of life. And the enslaved persons within the Caribbean context, within the Virgin Islands, they still had these teachings. that were part of their life, and they would bring them alongside the things that they were now learning, that they were adapting from the European side. But on the basis of it, you would still find those African values were still there.
And clarify for us the term creolization.
When you refer to creolization, it refers to the whole process of being localized, as it were. And
so adapting the European culture and blending it in with your African culture,
a bit of everything,
and making it relevant.
Making it one. So you take now that creolization, where you had a people who came in from African descent, enslaved by Europeans, being forced to do things the European way, but still bringing into that mix some of their African tradition, adapting some of the traditions around them within the Caribbean, certain things that came from, let's say, the Indians who were here, the Caribs and the Iraq. Sometimes we talk about the Indians who lived here, but then at certain point there was an interaction between these different groups of persons, and we see that even in terms of the food we eat, cassava bread. You know, this is something that was adapted from the Indians, and the use of corn with feeding of the slaves. They talk about Indian corn. You know, so there was some adaptation that was taking place. So you had this environment within the Virgin Islands, and you say, well, look, here's where we are. How do we live within this context? We are enslaved. How do we exist? Because you want to have a life of your own outside of being a slave.
And how do you adapt? And that was part of our genius and our ingenuity, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Because some serious things happened. To be able to exist within a plantation system that was imposing a vigorous system of enslavement, and then through generations to be able to adapt within that, so that you survive. Because it was about survival.
It was about, and we have survived. I mean, look at us now. I mean, I think the fact that we are here and sitting right here now, you and I, talking about what we are talking about and doing what we are doing, is certainly a testimony to our greatness.
And I think it's deeper than we would have thought. I was surprised when I went into it and you started looking. For example, if you look at the issue of resistance within the plantation system, within the slave society, how the enslaved resisted their enslavement. And when we think about resistance, sometimes we think about the outright revolts. But then there was subtle forms of resistance where they were saying, well, look, you know, you can say what you want, you could do what you want, but this is who I am, and this is what this is what I'm going to be. For example, when I looked at the Virgin Islands in particular, the issues of running away within the Virgin Islands was higher than any other colony in the region. The highest rate of runaway, because we look at the runaway rate within other territories. When I looked at the Virgin Islands, going through the slave registers, we had a higher rate of runaway. And what did that say to me? That the Virgin Islander, the enslaved within the Virgin Islands, they were saying, well, look, you know, you are imposing this thing on me. I don't wish to do it. And they showed their dissatisfaction by running away.
And we are going to resist.
We resist. So we run away.
We refuse
we go when we want. Yeah. And sometimes I had to beg them to come back. And they came back under the conditions. They set conditions. Well, I would come back under these particular conditions. Only if you do so and so. If you give me my freedom, I would come back. You know, other than that, I'm not coming back.
Last week, we talked to Teacher Jenny about the values, things like saving yourself, women saving themselves from marriage, young men learning a trade, learning how to do something, learning how to take care of themselves and their families, the whole cultural feel of owning your own home, having a place for your family, for yourself, as a part of becoming a man. Our manhood during that time was tied up in our ability to provide for a family. Our ability to get a wife was tied up in our ability to provide for her. You know, the village, you know, the cliche that came out, that well, I call it a cliche now, but the saying that came from our African, every culture is claiming it now, the village raised a child.
Yeah.
But that is our African proverb. and I'm laying claim to it, and I'm stating categorically that that's where it came from. The village raised a child, and indeed during that time the village raised a child. You know, because I mean, I remember several times people who weren't my parents corrected me physically and verbally. So those we were talking about those values and those traditions, and I want to get a sense tonight from you what the value of those things. And let's start out for the value of virtuousness in the male and the female, and the roles that the delineation of the roles that they had. What was the value of that understood role between male and female? Well, let's deal with that one at a time. The value and the virtuousness of both male and female during that period.
Well, what I would want to say is that in terms of values, you would say, oh, what are the value of values? Now, our values determine who we are as a people, because that is what makes us different from anybody else. When you talk about a Virgin Islander, what is it that makes the Virgin Islander? There are certain values that have been instilled in every Virgin Islander, and whenever you meet that person, you recognize him, you recognize that individual as a Virgin Islander just by your dealing with him, because you have come to understand that there are certain things about the Virgin Islander, and this person fits all of those. So and so that is the importance of our values. Our values determine who we are. It gives us grounding, because I know who I am. You know, my family, we've been in the UK for about 5 years, and it was difficult for me, for my children being away from the Virgin Islands, living in a different country. So we would sit and talk about what it means to be a Virgin Islander, you know, and try to instill in them, you know, as Virgin Islanders, this is how we do things, this is how we see it, this is how we react, and you know, so that they can learn to appreciate that. So it gives you grounding. It helps you to appreciate who you are, and it connects you not only with the persons around you, but it connects you with your past.
With your past. I also want to include in that discussion what it meant for the society, what the culture, what the behavior meant for society. For example, what was the result of a young lady? What was the result to the family structure of a young lady saving herself for marriage, and a young man being able to provide for her a home in a stable environment for her and the children that they're about to have? What was the social value for that?
There was a value in that. You know, if you talk with some of the older people, they will tell you that this was important, because, for example, if as a young man, if you were interested in a young lady in your village, you couldn't approach her and talk to her. You know, that was forbidden. And before you could do that, you have to write a letter to her father. And in that letter, you outline your intentions. You're seeking his permission. Now, what you write in that letter now becomes a binding contract, as it were. And the father, you know, as I was told, the father held on to these, because this is important, because you are making an agreement. You are stating an intent. And so it's important. So now you have the parents on one side, they are upholding one end, and the young man on the other side, he's upholding his other end. And that's where you saw this sort of union that was coming together, that you know, people work towards. And it was very important.
And it strengthened the family bond.
Exactly.
And of course, it maintained a situation where both parents share the raising of the child.
Exactly.
And then the value, that the social value from that was that it provided a stabler community because of the commitment that was made because of that particular tradition.
Yeah, and you see, sometimes we look back now and we say, well, you know, those actions were way off. They were draconian in their approach. You know, I can recall a teacher saying, one of our retired educators saying, you know, about some young people, say, you know, when I was teaching, she said, when I was teaching, you know, as good a teacher as I was, if I had gotten pregnant,
that was it.
That was it.
Yeah.
You know, I no longer have a job.
You had
you
to
know,
set
and
the example.
you walk around, whoa, you know, that sounds serious. But what the society at the time was saying that teachers were looked up to, and if you got pregnant outside of marriage, then you're sending a bad signal to everybody else. So the values that the society held were so tight that it went to that level.
It's made for a very stable environment. I remember, you know, we used to say, the teacher say.
Yeah.
When you say the teacher say, that was it.
Yeah, even your parents,
your parents will tell you, the parents will tell you, the teacher say, or,
exactly.
And the parents tell you, the teacher say, you back off. And when you tell the parents, the teacher say, the parent back off.
Yeah. So you see the values in terms of how we lived it in the Virgin Islands, and you're talking about a simple lifestyle, but these were the things that held the society together, because you had a certain expectation from everyone. Because you know, I remember there was a story where they talked about Mr. Roland Hodge. And he said, well, of course he would give credit for whoever have a front have a back, and whoever have a back have a front. That is, you come to him, you face him, you take your credit, and you see your back go, but you have to turn around and come back at some time.
Yeah.
So, you know, there was like this connection, you know, you are an individual. Yeah. So you get credit, but then you're expected to live up to that and come back and pay.
And of course, the self-esteem and the value of the man in the society, the young man in the society, was held high because of the fact that he took on the responsibility, the role as a man in his manhood, and as a father to his children, as a provider. He might not know anything else, but he knew that he was the provider, the primary provider, and he had to make sure, if he had to go to Santo Domingo, if he had to go to St. John through the window, if he had to go to St. Thomas through the window, if he had to go to Antigua, he knew that somehow, one way or the other, he had to provide for his family.
And that is something that, you know, you find interesting. I grew up in Cane Garden Bay, and you know, and I've heard persons talk about that too. But this was something that I lived through growing up in Cane Garden Bay, where you lived in a community that was literally managed by women.
Yes.
And you know, a lot of my friends who lived with their grandparents, their grandmother, because what happened on a Sunday afternoon, a group of men left the village by boat. And that was a big thing in the village, because everybody gathered on the beach and these boats were pushed off. The most fascinating time was when the Grongsi was up, you know, and they have to get the boats out, and you know, sometimes they had a few of them capsized, and you know, they have to get the boats back upright and get their stuff back into the boats. But everybody left and went to work in St. John's. So they went to St. John on a Sunday afternoon, came back on a Friday afternoon. But it was the women in the community who kept things going, you know. But they went out in search of employment and brought back, you know, to the community.
And what was interesting about that to me was that the whole notion of women's liberation was never one that we as a people had to grapple with. Our women were always liberated.
I think that, you know, we jump on a lot of bandwagons, you know, because this is what the outside world is telling us. But in terms of our values, and that's why I always said that whole concept about women's lib, it makes no sense to me, because growing up in that kind of environment where it was the women who ran things in the village.
They had the cottage industries, they had the stores, they nurtured the children, they made sure they did their homework, they kept the house, there was food every time the man came home, and you know, and they ran things.
Yeah, they did.
They corrected the children.
They did. My uncle traveled to St. Thomas on a regular basis to do. He was in farming, and then he would go. There was a shipping day when he carried his produce to St. Thomas to be sold, and when he came back, I can remember, you know, in the evening when he came back, because he would take stuff for other people to sell, and he comes back and he would sit with my aunt, and they would have these little bags with the money, and they do their accounting, you know, and then she sorts out who is being paid what for how much produce he sold for that person. Literally, it was the women, in my view, it was the women that ran the community. You know, they were in charge.
Another important value that we had was what we call the unwritten order. you know, where you as a young person, the village had some expectations of you. There was a path that you followed. Talk to us about that.
With young people growing up in your community, there was a certain expectation. And it still happens, but to a lesser extent, because now it's just your family. But this was a wider community thing. People look to you for certain. For example, young men. You mentioned in terms of you going to school. I've met several of the older men in my community. You speak with them, and they talk about when they came out of school. Some of them talk about going into teaching. Thoroughly enjoyed it, but had to leave because the profession could not pay enough for them to support a family, because that was the key. Because these were young men who now must prepare for the future. They have to build their own house. So as a young man, you come out of school, you learn a trade. That was key.
That was key.
You learn a trade. So you probably apprentice to somebody, you work along with somebody, but you learn a trade. You had to learn a trade. And then after that, you start, because at the time, well, families owned the land, you would have been given a little spot somewhere and say, well, look, you know, this is your house spot.
Yes.
You know, and you build your house. So, you know, I can remember one, a friend of mine, an older friend of mine saying to me that, you know, an older man in the village had pulled him aside and say, you know, you have to look for some place to put your head first.
It's time for you to build your house now.
Because, you know, the old man had observed certain things about him, you know, and he said, no. First.
You look at money. You look at money. You can't look for one.
No. He said, that's not the way. Yeah. First, you have to look for some place to put your head. Yeah. You know, and you know, and then he said, you know, but it was how the community directed you, because you built your house. You know, once you built your house, then you go and
you're right in.
You're right in. You're right in. Because it's like you have to say, well, you have to show that you have some place, because if you're going to write in for somebody's daughter,
the first thing I'm going to ask you, where you going to put her?
Where you going to put her? That's the first thing. And it's interesting to see that. And young ladies, on the other hand, they too had to prepare themselves, because it was like in some cases they prepare for marriage and family, because that was what the society saw at the time. The young men prepare themselves in terms of their career, a house, and how they're going to support a family. And the young ladies start that process too. By the time they're finished school, they have to set up what was called a hope chest. You know, you hear people talking about, oh, I can put this in my hope chest, you know, because there's a hope that you're going to get married and you're going to have a house of your own, and these are the things that you would need to put in your house. And they work towards that, because then it meant that even if they had their career, whatever it was, they worked towards that point when they're going to get married, because that was what society expected.
And the virtuous woman was highly regarded.
Yes.
And when you look at that unwritten order, and you look at the value of it from the perspective that any one of those rules that were broken, but any part of that order that was not followed, you incur tremendous difficulty.
You have problems. You know, it's like the psalmist David said, if you break the fence, the serpent will bite you. So whenever you break the rules, you break outside of what is required, then you have a problem. And you know, so that is why those things were set in place. And as you say, an unwritten order. It was there to guide you. It was there to help you to focus. And we've kind of strayed away from all of that now. So you would say, well, look at where we are. As a result.
And that's right. And of course, the value of that again was stabilization of the community. You had less social ills, less out of wedlock children, more families, a stronger family structure, and a stronger community where everybody know from that value would look out for each other's children. And I think that those are the things in terms of the value of our values. You look also in terms of the independent character of the Virgin Islander. You know, the Virgin Islanders, as a Virgin Islander, you learn certain things, and the Virgin Islander is seen as an independent-minded person. I don't remember, I don't remember any person in my community that worked for somebody else. It's like everybody was a business person. Everybody was a business person.
Everybody did their own thing.
Yeah.
You know, so the Virgin
and traded among each other.
Yeah, the Virgin Islander worked towards that. So it wasn't about jobs. It was about survival.
Producing and creating.
Exactly. And you know, we look at it now, and these are people that were doing that. And but it was a way of life.
Yes.
The Virgin Islander was an independent-minded person. The creativity was the thing. They were creative. You know, I remember stories about a cousin on my grandmother's side of the family, and they talked about this man, and they talked about what he did. You know, and when it was described one day, I said, you know what? He was into recycling. You know, and it was like, you know, it struck me years later that this was recycling. They talk about him, he would break apart car batteries. This was when, you know, vehicles were just coming in, batteries were around the place from boats, and he would break them apart and take the lead out, melt it down, and create the lead for scenes, you know.
Yes, yes.
You know,
yes.
and stuff like that, you know.
Yes.
And, you know, and when you hear that, they said, but the guy was into recycling,
yes.
you know, simple things,
and a genius.
You know? Yeah,
yes.
and you know, so they were molding stuff, they were creating stuff, and you know, but
just
that was the value.
digging everything that we needed to survive out of the ground, out of the environment, out of the environment,
and that is how the Virgin Islanders lived and survived within this context. Because, for example, if you look at our agricultural industry, you clear a piece of land. You would say, well, let's just clear the land and you plant food. But they clear the land. Whatever trees cut down, the wood is used. You burn that to make charcoal.
Make a coal pit, yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. The leaves, the bush, you bush the coal pit with it.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And then even after that,
you use everything.
You use everything. So nothing is thrown away.
Yes.
Nothing is thrown away. So you then find that they weren't wasteful. You know, you don't throw stuff away. You make it possible so that you utilize every bit of it.
And we didn't have a lot of garbage accumulation.
Exactly.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
so and then there was a concept about caring for your environment. Mm-hmm. You know, people learn to care for the environment. You know, sometimes we got away because of we see, well, look, you know, economically, there's certain things that come into being where we say, well, you can make some money, and I think that what happened there is that sometimes you have to pull back. I can tell you a story. In Cane Garden years ago, there was the issue of sand removal. Because when the construction industry boomed in the Virgin Islands, you know, there was the need for sand, and it had to come from somewhere. So trucks were coming into Cane Garden Bay, and I always say it was a good thing that they didn't have backhoes and Hymac at that time. So it was just shovels, you know, to load a truck of sand. So people were just selling sand, you know, and eventually it got to the point where the cemetery is on the beachfront area, and I remember there was a season of ground sea. You know, people start realizing that this thing getting serious because the sea getting closer to the cemetery. And I remember conservation got involved. I don't think it was called the conservation department, but government got involved, and they were passing laws about removal of sand, to prohibit the removal of sand from on the beach. And there was a meeting in Cane Garden Bay, and some people were saying, well, oh, they didn't see the problem with it. You know, you take some sand up and more sand comes back. And it was said that meeting changed because of one man who simply said, you know what, fishes lay eggs, but sand doesn't. You know, and when you look at that, that's profound.
Yes.
You know, because what he saw is how the cycle. You know,
there was going to be no regeneration.
No regeneration. The sand doesn't recreate itself.
Yeah.
Once you use that, it's done. You know, so he said fishes lay eggs because fishes regenerate themselves, but sand doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a sense of caring for your environment. I think was also a key part of Virgin Islanders. That kind of a value that we have.
Absolutely, in the use of the calabash.
Exactly.
And the tin that some of the foodstuffs came in.
Yeah,
and how
you put a handle on that, and you have cups.
And all of those things.
You use everything.
You use everything.
So you learn to economize, and those were the value system that you came up with within the context of the Virgin Islands.
Yes, we're gonna take a break. We're gonna open the phones, and the number's gonna come up on the screen, and the text number's gonna come up on the screen. You could text us, or you can call us if you remember some values and some traditions of our culture that you want to bring to our memory, or you want to ask a question or you want to make a comment, please feel free to do so. First, we're going to take a break, and we're going to come right back with more Dr. Smith and Spotlight right after these words from our sponsors.
This program is sponsored by the law firm of J.S. Archibald & Co. and by the trust company J.S. Archibald Trust Services Limited, both of Roadtown, Tortola, BVI.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm Edjuenka, and I'm having the most exciting conversation with Dr. Angel Smith, Director of Virgin Islands Studies at H. Laverty Stowell Community College. We are having a great time. I'm really enjoying this immensely, talking about the value of our values, how important it was and is, those behaviors, those practices, those traditions, and those values that we had as a community and as people, and I would say prior to the 1960s, because I remember I was born in the 1950s, and I remember some of those values and those traditions at that point, you know, when I was a young boy growing up in East End. So I think up until that point, and I think the shift happened perhaps with the advent of television and the changing over of the economy into a tourism economy, and then we got the exposure through increased technology to the outside world, and I think we gave up. Yeah, we gave up some of our values for the new value system, and I contend. And tell me your views on this. I contend that the reason why it was so easy for us to give up those values is because at the time we were practicing those values, we did not understand the value of what we were practicing. We
didn't see the importance of those values. We were looking at survival, and in that process, you know, you move towards something else, which brings a different dimension, and you give up what you had completely.
Yes.
You didn't just adapt to a new way of life, you give it up and you move forward. But I think one of the values that I don't think I should overlook is that the value of family.
Yes.
No, I think we talked about some aspects of it, but I think we can't overlook that, because that is what was key within the Virgin Islands. Family ties.
Yes.
You know, family ties ran deep. You know, you recognize your cousin.
It was a bedrock.
That was it.
Yeah.
You know,
to the point. To the point where you extended it to us. The term uncle and aunt to a stranger.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. You know, everybody within a community there were some ways of recognizing them, and there were some titles that were used. There was Tanti.
Yes.
You know, and that was this particular person, Neni. You know, but the family thing for the Virgin Islander, I think, was one of the key things that made the Virgin Islanders who they were, because life evolved around your family. That was your gang, as it were. The people who looked out for you, no matter where you were, and people who looked at you and recognized you, because they see the family traits.
And they see the family in you.
They see the family in you.
They could tell you right there, that's Barry's by.
Yeah, you know, and that is something that, you know, I think we have lost because we haven't paid attention to it. You know, I remember growing up, an old aunt who had said to me, you see he chest like Bishop. He chest like Bishop. I had no idea what she was talking about.
Yeah. You
know, and then when I grew up, then I found out who this person was. You know, and the family member, and then, you know, people would talk about these members of the family, and you know, your body built. That you're built like them, and then I start looking at my brothers, and then I start looking at other people, and I said, "Whoa, this is serious." You know, so you see the family resemblance. It's drawn straight through, but the family thing
and
in the Virgin Islands was important.
And were we able to tell some of the character traits of the individual as well. I mean, the physical aspect of the individual is one thing, but then the character trait, you could see a certain character coming through in the offspring.
because of who you were.
The family was the related bloodline family, but the whole territory was a family.
Yeah, but then you see too, it goes even further, because from what you're saying, and bearing in mind that we're talking about a period when there were no social services within the Virgin Islands.
Yes.
No social services.
Yes.
And in every family, there was one person who assumed the role of the head of the family. And it's fascinating when you look at it, because in every family you can find that person. Yes. It might have been the oldest brother or the oldest sister, but there was someone who, when there were problems, that person showed up and that was it. They solved it.
They solved the problem.
They fixed everything. And I grew up in that kind of context. I grew up, my aunt was the head of the family. And my aunt had no children of her own, but her house was filled with children. But she systematically took a child from different members of the family, for one reason or another.
Yes.
And she
raised them.
Yeah, and we were considered her children. But the whole family thing within the Virgin Islands, it went to that extent where you looked out for other members, as the old people would say, blood was thicker than water. And you look up. If you look at what happened with regards to persons who moved to the U.S. Remember when the Danish islands became U.S., whoever was living in St. Thomas, St. John, St. Croix at that time, whoever was living there when the U.S. flag was raised and transferred there, they were now U.S. citizens. So there were a host of Virgin Islanders who were living there, who were working there, and these persons became U.S. citizens. And you know what they did? They then turned around and filed for other family members to get U.S. status. Yes. So then you have this movement of persons across the border from the British to the U.S. side because of that same family tie. Yes. That's how deep it went.
And when they went to the States, there was always a care package coming back.
Exactly.
There's always a care package coming back.
So there was persons who left. They left to better life for themselves, but they sent back stuff. Yes. I talked about my uncle having this boat going to St. Thomas on a regular basis. When he came back, there were persons there to collect stuff because people were sending stuff back to family members.
Yes. I'm reminding you that the phone lines are open. You can call or you can text. You can call or you can text and participate in discussion if you want to. Now, for some particular reason, and you probably could explain this, education was recognized during that time as the most important thing.
The most important thing
for a person to have.
Because education was the one thing that it was felt that everybody needed, that nobody could take it away from you.
Yes, once you get that,
nobody can take that away. You get money, people can take that from you, but they could not take education from you. And so you had small communities where people went all out to ensure that some members of the family got the best education possible.
Yeah, let's take
and they supported it.
Yes. Thank you for calling Spotlight. Go right ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, good night.
Good night.
Now, I'm watching your show and I'm enjoying it.
Thank you.
But I want to ask you something. Now I'm from the East Caribbean. I'm sure you can hear from how my voice sounds. And I'm living here as a BV Islander with an accent from a different country.
Yes.
And I have children born here.
Yes.
And so when you see my children on the street, are you going to not recognize them because of the migration of, like, more or less has infiltrated now your Virgin Islands thing? So you want to recognize the genealogy. Are you suggesting that you will not be able to do that because they're not on 100% Virgin Islanders? And you might be able to pick up the mother's side, but not from the father's side.
Let Dr. Smith talk about that. I think that's not what we're talking about at all, and absolutely not. But let Dr. Smith respond to that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, well, what I was talking about was the fact that from a tradition, how people operated, you know, because of the family structures within the Virgin Islands, you could look, they were able to look at you and say, well, this is who you were, because they saw that family resemblance. Now, I think we have recognized that the Virgin Islands have changed a lot over the years, and so we are actually talking about the fact that we no longer have these traditional values and these traditional things. We have evolved over that period of time. So there are other aspects that we recognize, but then the value system in terms of who we are as Virgin Islanders, I think still extends to everyone. It has nothing to do with the physical characteristics now, but in terms of the character of the individual, because as a Virgin Islander, you learn, and you live in the Virgin Islands, you learn certain values, and these are what become important for you.
And what we are hoping too, if we are attempting to bring those values back, what we are hoping is that everyone who is in the Virgin Islands would practice those values. And so, my brother, your children would be recognized and be taken care of because of those values in the same way as every Virgin Islander. Yeah. You there, Carla? I think he's gone. But yeah, so the values and the culture transcends nationality, national boundaries, and all ethnicities.
Because it's like someone moves to the United States, for example, and we say from the time they book the flight, they start to yank.
Right.
Because they figure now, if you're going to live in the United States, you have to speak in a certain way.
Yes.
In the Virgin Islands, we speak in a certain way. You know, we use certain we say certain things in a certain way that somebody else wouldn't say in another way. For example, you know, people make fun of us, say, well, you know, we say the V has a W sound, you know, and you know, little things like that. This is what makes a community. They're not things that we should be ashamed of, because this is what speaks to who we are.
But like I said, I want to stress vehemently. And I'm glad that Carla called, because it's an important point, and I want to stress to the greatest extent that we can that the values, the cultural values that we are talking about, is inclusive. It's an embracing value, and something when everyone practices it is a benefit to all. And by no means are we attempting to make any separation or to separate the Virgin Islander from anyone else, or to exclude anyone else in the Virgin Islands. What we are saying that these values and these traditions stood us in good stead, and were we to practice them now, we would have a better society for it.
Yeah, it's about, for example, it's talking about, you know, being conscious of who you are. Appreciating where you are in terms of your geographic location, and living according to that, you know, and setting yourself up. This is who we are as Virgin Islanders. This is what is important. We live in a small community where I can't afford to be that upset with you that I don't talk to you, because by Sunday I go to church and we end up at the communion rail. Because it's a small community. Because it's so small, you know, I can't avoid you. So we figure, well, we have a problem, let's sit down and we sort it out. Because we have to then adjust to where we are as a small community and as a people.
We are under the turning of the clock, and I was afraid of this, but there's so much to discuss. But I wanted to leave with the emphasis on education, because I remember growing up as a child, every adult and old person in the community knew when the school term ended. And the first thing they would ask you when they see you along the road is, why you come? Meaning what position in class you were. And if you did not, if you come lower, if you were below third in your class, they were encouraging you or letting you know that was unsatisfactory.
But I think it goes right back to even beyond us and far back, you know, in terms of our ancestors, where they recognized that an education was so important. You know, what I find fascinating when I go through the historic records, like the slave registers, and I found the old registers where there were white Europeans who were owning slaves who could not sign. But then when I came to a certain point where there are free coloreds and blacks who owned slaves and could sign, that blew me away. You know, that these people at this point in time, that they were so into it that they learned to read and write.
They recognize the importance.
You know, and they recognize the importance. So it goes that far back. Growing up in a small community where all that was happening in your community was the school. The school was the center of your community. That was life in the community. Anything happened in a school, everybody knew. So everybody focused on the school. The teachers were important because they were the ones that were going to ensure that you get a better life. Education was the thing to make life better for you. So people pushed their children towards education. There are people who made great changes in their life who migrated to the U.S. side of the border because they want their children to have greater opportunities for education. But education was very important.
You think that these values and the value of these values that we're talking about, is this something that we could bring back into the future? Can we modernize them somehow? I know, you know, when people talk about culture, we talk about history, and we look back, the tendency is to think that, you know, well, that was the past, we're never going to regain that, we're not going back to these things, cooking on, you know, to live the life that we lived in the past. But can the values be brought forward, and is that something that we should strive for?
I think
quick as you can.
Yes, I think it could be, because we're talking about the quality of life, and that's what it is. And you know, and your values make it in terms of how we live with each other, and that's basically what values are. How we interact with each other. If I say that this is what I'm going to do, I'll do it, because you know we have an understanding. You know, if there a matter comes up, I'll tell you the truth, because those are basic values. I'll be fair,
I'll be honest.
Exactly.
Those are our basic values. Those are our basic values.
And those are what the things we're talking about. Not being wasteful, not that you know, just spend money for spending money's sake. You know, but being creative,
helping each other, making sure each other's having, surviving, and doing well.
And that's what it is we're talking about.
And glorying in each other's success.
Exactly. You support each other, because that's what the community was about. You support each other. You ensure that you know, even if I can't make it, somebody else can. When they make it, you know, I'm happy for them.
We out of time. Literally out of time. I gotta thank you. It was a fantastic discussion, and I'm looking forward to more discussions like this as well. Thank you very much for agreeing to come and for making such a tremendous contribution to African Descendant History Month. That is Dr. Angel Smith, Director of Virgin Island Studies at H. Laverty South Community College. Next week we'll continue our African Descendants History Month with Dr. Patricia Turnbull, author of a new book, Can These Stones Talk? And we're going to be talking about the liberated Africans that created the Kingston settlement right over here, just beyond Fish Bay, and the cultural significance of that settlement. So don't miss it as we continue African Descendants History Month. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your words of encouragement, your suggestions and your criticism. Continue to email me with suggestions at jtvspotlight@yahoo.com. Don't forget, Spotlight is rebroadcast every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. here on JTV Channel 55. And you can view Spotlight on demand at jtvlive.net on your internet. I'm Edjuenko, reminding you that when the spotlight is on, you see the facts. Peace and blessings.
Spotlight is brought to you by Tortola Concrete Limited and CCT Global Communications.